in the beginning, it was a little hectic. We didn't have a lot of money. My mother had me when she was 16, turning 17. Until she had me, she was a young maniac climbing on the L trains, writing graffiti. And then all of a sudden, boom, oh yeah, she's gonna be a mother. And I think it was a little overwhelming. My father was not very a good person. Very talented in woodworking. For not being a smart person, he had this idiot savant kind of way with measurements, mathematics, laying shit out. But other than that, he was an abysmal father, abusive. And eventually, between first just fucking around with drugs, later dealing drugs, and then finally on drugs like crack cocaine. And that really kind of put my mother, myself, and later my sister, who's 3 years younger than me, kind of in the path that we were through from the time I would say my sister came along when I was 3. By the time I was 7, we were living, me and my mother and my sister were living in an apartment next door to her aunt and uncle. And it wasn't a good neighborhood. My mom, obviously, she didn't even have a GED. So, she had to make things happen for us. And I mean, it was a lot of pancake breakfasts, pancake dinners. There was a lot of times when we didn't have certain utilities. And I mean, we're talking like having to share the hot water. There was a lot of that early on. And eventually what my mother did was she started putting herself through GED, which when she did that, she would take me to the library local to us in Frankfurt. And that kind of put me on the path of reading books and began kicking my young brain off. Mm-hmm. And my mother did a lot to make sure that my sister and I just got through. And the neighborhood wasn't great. And we didn't have a father figure. There was dudes in and out. My mom, obviously being 22, 23, she was the best that she could be for a young 20-year-old girl, Yeah. And at some point, she actually even started stripping on the side just because she couldn't keep money coming in. And it's a weird story, but it's like my mom one day came up to me. She's like, hey, I got to tell you this so that way if somebody in our family or someone says to me, hey, your mother takes her clothes off for a living, this is what I have to do to make sure we can afford this place.
Wow.
And but like that's the one side of a coin. The other side of a coin is she took us to the park whenever she could. There was a lot of cool shit. I always joke around now and put a lighter side on it. Like that was like really the basis for a lot of the beginnings of me finding out about hardcore music. And so in the late 80s, we were dealing with a major crack epidemic, and our neighborhood wasn't great. Yeah. And thankfully, at that time, we lived next door to my Uncle Bill, who has more guns than any human being alive. His AOL name is straight up Wild Bill 357. Like, and he's like this old former cop maniac. And that dude's the only reason why I think like we were able to live on the block, It wasn't easy. I mean, you had no father figure really. We had to, early on when I was young and not in school, we'd have to sit in the welfare lines, like physically sit in the welfare with my mom, get actual food stamps, not a card, like Monopoly money looking food stamps. Mm-hmm. And I remember like going to stores and having this money in my hands and trying to hide it as I'm paying out. And then one time my friend saw me, he's like, oh yeah, my mom's on food stamps. And then it hit me like, oh shit, our whole neighborhood's also on food stamps. Mm-hmm. But yeah, a lot of I think a lot of the stuff that would get me excited about hardcore, and comes through metal and comes through just being angry at our situation, and then like it's 1990, I'm starting to grow my hair out. I play soccer all the time, but I'm listening to Metallica every day. I'm starting to find out what death metal is. So I'm not making what's that?
Did you have friends who were into that scene as well, or it was just like
no.
You with the tape getting into it on your own?
I literally had older cousins who played Dungeons and Dragons and their friends, and around that time, there were some people whose parents might like Aerosmith, and so I got called Dusty Joe because I had long hair. I had to fight a lot because I was literally like a pip on a domino in some classes. I'm like the only white kid with a long hair. So I had to fight a lot after school, and I didn't win a lot of fights. My my mom eventually would just say, look, you got to stop running. You got to fight these kids. I don't care if you have to fight them all one-on-one. It kind of put you on that like crazy path of like, it's one of my things where now it's like, I guess we're just going to fight right here. And I grew up also loving the 1970s Broad Street Bullies era of the Flyers.
Mm-hmm.
I played a lot of like Milex street hockey. We didn't have a lot of money, so we didn't have all the fucking nicest pads. You know, like we played on a corner. We never, this time them single, what are they? What are them single roller blades? We didn't even have them. We didn't even have, we played on our feet. But I kind of just started embodying the grab the shirt and just punch this person more than they could punch me as a kind of way. And eventually these kind of kids were kind of like, all right, this crazy white dude's just not going to stop, you know? And then when like Vanilla Ice and all this shit started coming out is really when a couple people started popping their heads like, yo, I listened to this too, but they had like short hair. Mm-hmm. My rebellion was kind of going into full thing. My mom was dating this guy who got me into everything from like the Ramones to this band Wasp. He was taking us to more concerts because he was in a heavy metal band. It kind of even put me further. And eventually I did meet older friends who lived on the other side of the railroad tracks. Like the L train is behind my mom's house, like one block we're there. And then my friends were on the other side of the tracks, but they were like, I was 11, they were 13, 14, 15. And my mom's whole mentality was like, because she at the time was no longer stripping. She was still putting herself through college, but she was also working at this bar and booking metal bands, like hair metal bands and thrash bands. She was like, I don't care what you do. Like, she would rather see me at concerts than sitting at home.
She would go to hardcore shows.
Well, I don't think that we even knew what we were going to at first. Like, my first hardcore show was Sick of It All, Biohazard, and Sheer Terror opening. And it was on this street called South Street in Philadelphia. And the only reason why we knew about it was it's one of the main venues in the city, and there's posters all over. So with that group of older kids who were into heavy metal, I was able to go to South Street Friday nights and then sometimes Saturdays, and we would all go as a group together. You got to understand, like, I mean, you guys from New York, like, that was a world away from the 8 L stops of our neighborhood. Mm-hmm. That was like 14 stops before you got up and you're like, oh shit, it's downtown. You know, like I only been downtown for school trips. I never just went downtown. So that kind of put me in that path. And so then it was, you're looking at so much stuff. It's like a whole different world. Like kind of like if someone looked at the internet in 1996, it was like, oh my God, look at all this. For us, it was like, look at this guy's patch. Look at these posters on the wall. Look at these flyers. Look at these tapes. Like you could never consume enough.
Yeah.
So all of that led me to want to not go to my local school for high school. I took a school downtown, and that was it. It was over because I had already started meeting people because we were going to shows. My friends would be eventually, most of them become like basement stoner types. We might watch UFC together. That like, you know, we might watch WrestleMania and stuff all together. But like, I wanted to get out of the neighborhood. I mean, our neighborhood wasn't the worst, but it wasn't the best. But then in the beginning of the 90s, more shootings happened. There were straight up like legit problems because we weren't little kids no more. We were now in our teens. So, you know, we were long hairs in a fucking bad neighborhood.